Hi everybody, and in this video we are going to be talking about the giant New Caledonian Mossy Gecko, also known as the Mossy Prehensile Tail Gecko and the Chahoua, also known as the Chahoua Gecko. Nailed it.
Great success.
Let's first start by talking about their country of origin. Now, depending on what you call this species, you already know where they are from. These guys are endemic to New Caledonia. More specifically, they can be found in the Grande Terre region, and I'm saying that awfully, let me put my French accent on, Grande Terre region, with a few scattered localities, Mont Croggy in the south, to the Vallée des Mois in the north. This species can be typically found inhabiting gallery-type forested areas as well as closed forested areas. Closed forested areas are a type of biome where there's quite a lot of tall kind of trees and stuff, but there's also quite a lot of vegetation on the floor. Now, what on earth is a gallery-type forest? Well, I'm glad that you asked because I'm going to tell you. So a gallery type forest, put in easy terms, is kind of like a small kind of forested area that kind of hugs around waterways and stuff, but is sparsely populated on either side. So if we have a look at this photo, you can see trees and vegetation cling to the river, but a little further out, you can also see wide open spaces lacking in deep, thick vegetation. So we'll put a pin in that one. It's going to be quite important, especially if we want to do a kind of bioactive kind of setup. So how big do these animals get? So typically mossy geckos will get anywhere from around about 8 to 12 inches. Now, this is going to be dependent on what locality you have. So there are multiple localities, but the main ones that we typically see in captivity are the mainland locality and the Pine Island locality. Now, the Pine Island geckos, they will get a little bit bigger, reaching more of those 11 to 12 inch kind of sizes, whereas the mainland geckos will typically get around about 8 to 10 there or thereabouts. So it's still a relatively large gecko. Not quite as big as leeches and stuff, but still pretty big. So with these animals reaching a decent size, it's really important that we reflect this in the type of enclosure that we give them. So for one mossy gecko, we would typically recommend a 24 by 18 by 36 tall, or 60 centimeters by 45 centimeters by 90 centimeters tall. However, if you can go bigger, always go bigger. These animals will utilize this space. Also, if you wanted to go taller, this is going to play a really big role in your design of your enclosure. So you could really try and mimic those closed forested kind of areas. So lots of canopy opportunities right at the top, but also a lot of vegetation at the bottom. Moving on to cohabitation. Can you cohab these geckos? We're not quite sure. And the reason why we're not quite sure is because there's not that much data out there for them. When you read online, you will see that some people have done it successfully and other people not so successfully. So this could be down to a multitude of factors. So it could be the person's experience. So if they've been keeping geckos for a long time, they may be able to identify types of behaviors. It could be temperature dependent. It could be food availability. It could be height availability. Basically, there are lots of variables in terms of cohabitation. So on this one, we would just suggest keeping these animals on their own. So keep them singly. This is just as a safety precaution. In terms of humidity, you're going to want to keep these animals fairly humid. So anywhere from 60 to 80%. Now, don't panic if your humidity is rising and falling. As long as it's maintaining an average of 70 to 80, then you should be absolutely fine. A lot of people do over worry about when it comes to humidity, and they'll tend to spray the enclosure so it's literally waterlogged. Now, this is bad for a multitude of reasons. So one main one being bacterial buildup, fungal buildup. You get the idea. So what are we going to do in terms of heating these animals? Now, we would always recommend using basking spot bulbs just so that animal can soak up some of that nice infrared A and B. If your house is getting too cold on a nighttime, then we would also recommend using a ceramic heat emitter. The ceramic heat emitter is literally just for ambient heat only. So what temperatures are we going to have these animals at? So your basking spot bulb, you're not going to want it super hot. Anywhere from around about 28 to 29 degrees is absolutely fine. The ambient temperature should be anywhere from around about 22 to 24. So you'll note there's a fairly big difference in terms of the temperature within the enclosure. This is so if the animal is a little bit too hot, it can scarper off and cool down. On a nighttime, we really wouldn't recommend going any lower than 18 degrees. We would say the safest sweet spot would be around about 20 to 22. So if it's staying at that constantly, then you'll be absolutely fine. If you do find on the odd occasion it drops to like 19 or 18, I wouldn't worry too much. Just make sure that in general, it sticks around that 20 to 22 degree mark. Now, what are we going to do in terms of controlling the temperature inside of our enclosure? So, as always, we would typically use the trusty thermostat. So, you would always use a dimming thermostat with your basking spot bulbs. And if it is getting cold where you're from and you're using a ceramic, you can use a pulse proportional. You can also use a mat stat. However, the pulse proportionals are more designed for ceramic heat emitters. So, what other lighting are you going to have inside your enclosure? We would always strongly recommend using a UVB. Now, you're not going to want to use a strong UVB source just because these animals are a crepuscular, kind of nocturnally type animal. So they're not going to be exposed to really strong UVB rays, for example, like a bearded dragon would. We would recommend these guys to have a Ferguson Zone 1 to 2 bulb. Now, this is going to be dependent on the placement of the bulb, on your UVI. Anywhere from a UVI of like 1 to 3, we would typically recommend for this species. So have a look on the back of your UVB bulb boxes, see how far your UVB is going to come down. Don't forget, if you are also using a mesh screen lid, the mesh will cancel some of that UVB out. Another form of light that you can pop in there is LED. Now, LED isn't just good for your plant growth that you're going to potentially have in there. It's also pretty good for the animal's vision. Now, I know some people going to look quite perplexed when we say good for vision. Bear in mind that they are a nocturnal or crepuscular species, but they still need to have it. So it's also pretty good for the animal's photo period. So we would typically recommend a photo period of around about 12 on, 12 off. Moving on to one of my favorite parts of these videos, and it is the substrates and decor part. So let's attack these substrates first. So in terms of substrates, what we use with our geckos, we use like soily, jungly type mixes. So we would use things like the Zoom Med Reptisoil, we would use the ProRep BioLife, we would use the Arcadia Earth Mix, and the Lucky Reptile Jungle Earth. I like to mix all of these substrates all nice and together. So these jungle type mixes are really good for, one, your plant growth, if you're going to have live plants in there, but they're also really good for locking in that humidity. And as well, the thicker the substrate, the easier it is going to be to regulate the humidity inside your enclosure. So the previous brands that I've just mentioned are all really good for plant growth as well. So they are a reptile safe, nutrient packed soil for your plants. Don't go to like your local hardware store or a garden center and pick up any like composts or anything like that, as they could contain some harsh chemicals which could affect your animal. We'd also highly recommend using leaf litter inside the enclosure. Not only does it look pretty good, it's also really good again for locking in that humidity. It'll also give the animal potentially some more humid microclimate, so if it did want to go on the floor for whatever reason, it can do that and express that. And also pretty good for your cleanup crew and isopods. So this is the part that I really, really like. So when we get new animals in the store, I always like to like kit out them, do them all live planted and stuff like that. I just find it really, really fun. Now, what type of decor is going to be okay to use with these geckos? So we'll start off with plastic first. So if you want to use plastic, that's absolutely fine. Fine? That's absolutely fine. You can use any of the name branded like plastic plants. They're going to be okay to use in there. Now, for me, I prefer the much more natural look, as I'm pretty sure everybody is definitely aware by now. So I always like to use live plants, that type of thing. Now, scooching back over to the closed kind of like forested area that we were talking about. So you can do a really cool live planted enclosure if you wanted to. So you could get some plants that grow quite tall, but they're like not bushy, like going up. So things like umbrella plants would be really good for something like this. Also, Ficus benjamina, you could pop that in there, and you could like trim the base of it, so it's just kind of like bushy, like more at the top. And then you can put like your ground dwelling plants. So there's going to be a bit of space like between like the two kind of levels. And it's all about choice for the animal. So if the animal wants to experience the higher canopies, it can do. If it wants to go lower, it also can do that. Now, you're not just going to put live plants in there, also logs. So logs, branches, sticks, that type of thing, also very important. We definitely recommend packing as much in there as you possibly can. So most decent reptile stores, if you pop to them, they'll have things like cork bark, they'll have like talawa branches, they'll have like redmore, darkmore, they can have the liana vines, the Frankenstein roots, all those types of things. Now, what kind of diet are we going to be feeding these? So just like crested geckos and gargoyle geckos, these guys will eat the pre-mixed food. So pre-mixed diets that I would recommend using would be things like the Blue River diet, also the Rapashi and Pangea also. Now, these guys aren't just going to solely subsist off this. It's really important to add live food within their diet as well. Now, unlike crested geckos, these guys will have more live food within their diet. So you're going to go through a little bit more live food than you would do if you just had a crested gecko. Now, in types of live food that you can offer for them, you can offer them crickets, locusts, waxworms, moria worms, mealworms. You can offer them silkworms, all sorts of different bits and bobs. The more wide variety you can give the animal, the better. Now, it's also really important that when you are feeding your live food, that you also supplement them. So you can just supplement them with like a broad spectrum supplement, or if you want to be really technical, you can really look into the animal's diet and you can get specific supplements to supplement on each day. Whatever, it's completely up to you. And that about wraps us up for this video. So thank you very much for sticking all the way through to the end. I hope you've enjoyed it. I absolutely love these geckos. They are one of my absolute favorite new Caledonian species. I would definitely recommend people to get them. If you like crested geckos, you're gonna like these guys. They're just a little bit bigger. But yeah, on that bombshell, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one. See you later.